Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 2. We're at the conclusion of Discourse 139 on page 1167, Aleph Kuf Samach Zayin, at the end of the paragraph. And yesterday was a review and a summary of the Maimer, but briefly, this Maimer essentially established that there's the two perspectives, the Daas Elyon, Daas Tachton, perspective from above, perspective from below, in Atzilus itself. Broke it down further in Chochmah Atzilus, Chochmah La, Chochmah Tata. And the beginning of the Maimer, Atzilus was, all of Atzilus was Daas Elyon. The Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and Biyah was Daas Tachton. We also learned yesterday the Maimer a piece of the Maimer of the Rebbe, in the year Tov Tezvav, B'yem Hashmini Atzeres, which is equivalent of 1954, where the Rebbe also talked about essentially summing up these levels that we're discussing here. I just went back and was rethinking the last few Maimorim. So I can number, but if maybe somebody wants to do a little research and look at it closer, I didn't look inside literally, but based on my memory, I can count 10 different levels where the Rebbe Rashab places Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra. And especially if you go into Tzadik Daled, Friedrich Rebbe's Hemshech Tzadik Daled, where he elaborated on these ideas, there may even be more. And I'll just sum them up quickly without explanation, because back in the beginning, on the beginning of the topic, on page 1147, the Maimer B'Chedesh Hashvi, 2 Maimorim back. I believe it was, yeah. Or maybe 3 Maimorim back. No, 2 Maimorim back. So he placed the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra first all Lifnei HaTzimtzum, what he called Etzem Ha'er and Hispashtus Ha'er. So that's one. In that itself, he spoke about Ratzon and the levels of Ratzon, so that's 2. Then the second, so you have 2 right away. The second approach was that it's the Lifnei HaTzimtzum and La'achar HaTzimtzum, before the Tzimtzum and after the Tzimtzum. And that itself was another one, Sevav and Mamala, Sevav even after the Tzimtzum and Mamala. So they have 4. The third general category was they're both in Mamala Kalalmin, and there he also spoke 2 ways. He spoke the Kav, and the beginning of the Kav and the extension of the Kav. And then he spoke about the Etzem and the Ispashtus in Mamala. So you have there 6. Then now in this Maimer, you have higher than Atzilus and Biyah, that's 7. In Atzilus itself, both, that's 8. And in Chochmah of Atzilus also, both Primis HaChochmah, Chetzenis HaChochmah, that's 9. And then Chochmah La and Chochmah Tata, that's 10. Now, there may be more if you really break it down, but it just demonstrates how the Rebbe Rashab is showing, basically in every area of Ishtalshalos, you're going to find these 2, relatively speaking, these 2 type of perspectives, or the one that, the more the divine, that dvekus and connects and expresses the source, and the other focuses on the divine as it relates to the product, the product meaning the creation, the Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra. So it's just interesting how many different places. And it's not over yet. The next next Maimer, there's going to be a few more. So, so with that, let's conclude the Maimer here now on page 1167. So as I've noted many times, these beginnings and ends of the Maimerim were written in a second stage. The Rebbe Rashab first wrote the body of the Hemshech. It flowed one long flow. Then he went back. And sometime either it could be months or it could be weeks or it could be days before the actual time when he delivered the Maimer. Like in this case, this is a Maimer from Sukkot, from the second night of Sukkot, Ayin Vav, Tafresh Ayin Vav. So he went and added a beginning to he would take one piece of the Hemshech that was one flow and wrote a second booklet, a second manuscript where he said, in this place, in this long manuscript, add a paragraph, and that would be the beginning of, in this case, V'lekachtem lachem. Then he would go a few more, and later in the manuscript, put in the end of the discourse, the end of the end paragraph. And that's how he did this throughout the whole Hemshech. for 144 Maimorim. We're coming close to the end of that. We're in 139 now, Maimor 139. Then the volume 3 of Ayin Beis, called the Chelik Shalei Nemar, he never delivered. So there it's only one flow. You have no breaks of Maimorim. Now, since I already mentioned it, let me already mention another important point, and that is that in the third stage, he went back and added chapters and kitsurim. So in each Maimer, he added and said, this in this place, add chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And he added kitsurim, that he broke each Maimer apart into sections and added a summary. So we have chapters and summaries. That they did not even finish the 144 Maimorim. That concluded, I believe, in Teruma Ayin Hey. He did that for, I'll tell you exactly how many Maimorim. He did that in Teruma, would be 103 Maimorim, I believe, are broken into chapters. I'm looking right now to make sure. I believe Teruma was the last one, or maybe Mishpatim was no, my mistake, 102 Maimorim. Mishpatim was the last one where he broke it into chapters. So 102 Maimorim have everything. A breakdown of Maimorim, a breakdown of chapters with summaries, and from 103 and on till 144, you only have a breakdown of Maimorim. We're in that category, and then you have a section that doesn't have even a breakdown of discourses and Maimorim.
So these breakdowns that you have here without numbers, like V'zeu gam ken ha'hefresh, we call the Yuvon, this is not what the Rebbe Rasha made?
He made them all, but there's no chapter numbers. There's no number.
No numbers, but he made the breaks?
Yeah, but he made breaks also in the third section too. They're breaks, but they're not chapters. That's just breaks that he made in the flow of things. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about going back and actually numbering chapters in addition to these breaks. These breaks are not that many. They're here and there, you know. Okay, fine. Yeah, it stops at chapter 421 is the last chapter. Mishpatim, Zeyitnu. Okay, so with that said, so now we'll do the end of the Maimer, but before we go to the end, let me go back to the beginning just to remind ourselves of what the questions were. So it's a Maimer on Sukkos, and what's also fascinating here is we could see how the theme of this Ayin of Yesh Amiti, Ayin Yesh Anivra, the themes that are discussed, here the Rebbe Rashab integrates them into a specific theme, like in this case, L'kachtem Lachem of Sukkos. So it often adds Havana, understanding in the actual theme by looking of how the Rebbe Rashab applies it. So Al-Kaponim, the Maimer began L'kachtem Lachem B'yem Harishon, Priyates Choder Kapas Tmorim. The first question the Rebbe Rashab asked, why these Daled Minim? Among all the Minat Semeach, the thousands, the millions of species, or whatever the number is, why does he choose, why did the Torah choose Dafka these four? The Pri Yitzhodah, the Esrik, the Lulav, the Hadassim, and the Aravos. Then a second question he brought from Medrash Rabbah, what is it? B'yem Harishin. B'yem L'chavtlan, B'yem Harishin. Which was really the 15th of the month. It's not B'yem Harishin of the first of the month. Why does it say B'yem Harishin? So the Medrash says, because it's Rishon L'cheshbon Avenis. The Rebbe Rashab doesn't bring that here. Because after Yom Kippur, and 4 days that Jews are Asik and busy with mitzvahs, this is the beginning, so to speak, of the calculation of a new year, a new fiscal year of our iniquities. Let's put it that way. But the bottom line is, what is the meaning of the word B'yem Harishon? When it's really the 15th of the month. So now let's go to the answers. And always the language is, in the beginning of the Maimon, he says, to understand these questions, until L'kachtem Lachem, we need to preface and then continues the flow of the theme. Here, the other way around. He says, I'm sorry, wrong page. Alpi Hanal Yuvon, Alpi Hanal, Alpi everything we learned in this Maimer. Baratzilus and Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton, we'll soon see what pieces he's going to use as he explains the Pasuk. Yuvon Mashakasav L'kachtem Lachem B'yem Harishon Pri-Eitz. We'll understand what it says that you shall take to you in the first day, Pri-Eitz, a fruit of the tree, Pri-Eitz Hadar, which of course refers to the Esrik, but he's using the actual Lashon of the Pasuk. Remember, the Pasuk doesn't say an Esrik. They have to derive that, learn it out from the Pasuk. Okay. Dihini Yadua, B'kavanas ha-nanuyim. It's known in the kavanas that when you do the nanuyim, the movements, the 6 different movements we do but during Hallel, when we use the lulav, the daled minim, the 6 different directions. So it's called nanuyim. Nanuyim means a movement, and nanuata means. So it's known, there's kavanas. In Arizal, in Kabbalah, in many places, what's the kavanas that you're supposed to have when you're doing these movements? So what's the kavanas? So he's going to bring Kabbalistic language, I'll translate it. So you're doing the kavanas are nanuyim, and the intention that one has to have. And when you do these movements, shulahamshir b'chinas hadas benukve dezah, ha'imedes b'chazei dezah. The purpose of the nanuyim is to be drawn down, das, the level of das, into nukve dezah, into malchus of zah, ha'imedes b'chazei dezah. Where does it stand? Where is the location of malchus of zah? Chazei is, how do you translate chazei? No.
Chest.
Can't hear you. How do you translate chazei? Not the breast. Can someone look up? I forgot the English translation. Chazei is
Chest.
can't hear you. Can't hear you. It's full of an echo.
Chest. The chest.
The chest of Zah, yeah. So in other words, Das, of course, is in Meichin. Chachma Bina Das is the 3rd level of Meichin. Zah is the chest in general. Of Zah is the whole, the entire, you say Moich Leiv Kovid, the middle of the place, the whole torso and the chest. In Malchus, in Zah is Malchus is the lowest levels. We stand at the chest, and that is you're drawing down Das into Malchus of Zah. That's the Kabbalistic terminology for Lekachtem Lechem. That's why you take, where do you put the lulav and the esrog and the daled minim? You hold it right here. You take it here and you move it this way, always back to your chest. Because you bring mamshich, das, through the daled minim. I can't hear you. You have an echo. So, okay. So you bring mamshich, das into zah of nukva de zah. V'hainu, this means hamshoch is bechinas Daas Elyon b'malchus. So the Rebbe Rashab is explaining what level of das is this. So he says it's the level of Daas Elyon, the higher perspective, into malchus. Deliyah malchus bechinas Daas Tachton. Remember, we learned at the end of the Maimer, we learned that the interpretation of Chochmei law is Daas Elyon. Malchus, which associates with creating Biyah, the worlds, is Daas Tachton. So it says, since Malchus is a level of Daas Tachton, it's only the bitl hayesh. So now he's associating Daas Tachton the bitl hayesh. Why? Because you begin with the yesh. There's an existence. And you discover the divine Ayin within the yesh, which is a mysterious, ain't a musig, and it's not made of the same material. It's not the Ayin Amit of the yesh Amiti, which is all about complete bitl. So Daas Tachton of Malchus is a level, but it's only the level of Daas Tachton, bitl hayesh. So what's missing? It's missing the perspective of Daas Elyon. And he's going to explain the nanuyim of the daled minim. That's what they do. Ba'idei daled minim shebelulav. He's saying daled minim shebelulav because lulav is usually, say the pasuk on the tilas lulav, even though you're taking all the 4 species, but lulav is considered the primary one for different reasons. Al kaponim, the tallest, it also signifies. So dal minim shebelulav, you take the 4 species. He doesn't mean the 4 species within lulav, meaning that lulav includes 3 species. It just means that in the mitzvah of lulav, mamshichim through the daled minim, you mamshich bechinas Daas Elyon, bechinas bitl b'mitzias into what? Into malchus. So now you see the combination, bringing them together. Till now, he did not speak about how Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton speak to each other. Now, in the end of this Maimer, since he's talking about a particular Dibra Maschel, a particular posuk, and a particular mitzvah, Sukkos, he's applying the ideas we learned here to the mitzvah of Sukkos. So we see how Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton plays itself out, and it's a mitzvah of Daled Minim in general, and specifically the Nanuyim. So that.
Nukva Dezo is Malchus, right?
Hold on. Let me read this. And you want to ask something about what I just said?
No, he said before Nukva Dezo. This is Malchus. What's Nukva Dezo?
Nukva Dezo is a similar saying Malchus Dezo. Malchus is Nukva. Sometimes Kabbalah uses the word Nukva. Sometimes it uses the word Malchus. It's the same thing.
Okay, here it's a Nukva Dezo. That's Malchus. Mekabel Smezo.
Malchus Dezo. What's I said Nukva can be replaced with the word Malchus. Nukva Dezo means Malchus of Zoh. What's the question? You asked
No.
Malchus outside of Zoh or it's Malchus within Zoh?
No. Nukva Dezo. Malchus is Zoy Shisha Midas, and Malchus is Mekabel Mezo. So that's
this is what it says in other Maimonim. And here he says Malchus of Zoh. Why are you bringing other Maimonim into this? There's a thing called Nukva Dezo. Malchus of Zoh could either be the Malchus in the 6 Midas of Zoh, or it could be Malchus of Zoh, the partner with Zoh. It's not specific here. You'd have to look it up in the source. But he calls it many places. You call Nukva Dezo. Could be either one. Probably connected. They're both related to each other. But Kaponim, it's an expression very common in Chassidus and Kabbalah. Nukva Dezo. It's a level. Well, Malchus of Zoh. Okay. B'chazei Dezo. So you bring Mamshich Daas Elyon into Daas Tachton. Because Daas Tachton sees everything in the context of existence. The divine that relates to existence. The Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. So that's a bittul. Of course it's a bittul. Because the Yesh is recognizing that it has a force that's giving it life and sustenance and creates it. That's Malchus. That's the bittul of Malchus. And the bittul of Daas Elyon, which he calls Hamshachas Hadas, is that the Ikir is Elikus, everything is divine. And all of existence is completely nullified in the presence of the divine, the different levels of that. And so the Daled Minim is joining these two together. Yamamshich Das, that's what the Daled Minim do. Yamamshich Daas Elyon into Malchus, which is what I said, V'lekachtem lachem, take to lachem, meaning to you, drawing down Malchus, Daas Elyon into Daas Tachton. Das into Malchus of Zoh. Okay. V'hainu, this means Shemamshichim b'chinas Gili Ein Sof b'Malchus. That you're drawing down the Gili Ein Sof, the divine revelation of the infinite divine, into Malchus Liyas b'chinas Hadeya Mitis Ech Shekule Kamei. Kila Chashiv is the full expression. That there should be in Malchus the Deya Mitis. Daas Tachton is true, relatively true compared to the Yesh. But the Deya Mitis, what's the true perspective? The truth of all truths is that Atzmus, Yesh HaMiti is the true reality. And all of existence is Ayin, the Ephes. So you're infusing into Daas Tachton, into Malchus, the true Deya Amitis, how everything is Kula Kamei, everything before him, before God, is nothingness. That's what you're drawing down through the Daled Minim. Okay. So now he said, V'zehu shenivcheru elu hadaled minim dafke. And this will explain why dafke, these 4 species were chosen. Mipnei shemuvdalim mikol haminim b'ha'achdu shebehem. Because these 4 are distinguished and distinct from all species in vegetation, in the world of tzemech, in the world of vegetable world. They are distinct in their unity. There's something about each one of these 4 that has an element of a unified element that distinguishes it from other species. And he's going to explain. The esrog, where do you see unity in esrog? Esrog is unique. Most fruits, they ripen, they fall off the tree, and then starts a new season. Esrog dar bi'ilana mishana l'shana. Esrog does not fall off a tree. It remains, dar means to live. It continues to live on the tree, meaning the esrog tree branch, from year to year. It goes through all the seasons. All other fruits fall off during the autumn and then the winter, of course, and then in the spring begin to blossom again. Esrig is always on the tree through years. V'sevel shinui ha'avidim dal dalet kufas, and it tolerates and is able to endure all the changes of the seasons, of the 4 seasons. Avidim is the temperatures, the environments of the 4 seasons. Obviously, winter is the cold season, the heat of the summer, the spring, and the autumn. So a esrig rides through all of them. So you see an element of unity. It doesn't have any split. It's always there. It can deal with anything. So in other words, it has that type of endurance, a unifying endurance that goes through the entire year without having to go through any type of break in its growth, so to speak, which as it is with other species. That's esrig. This is not original from the Ayin Beis. This comes from Mittler Rebbe's Siddur based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, where they bring this Nekud of Achdus. The Rebbe would kochzech a lot on this, a lot during Sukkot, many times Erev Sukkot, you always would bring the Achdus of the Dal Minim. Then you bring them all by Aguda Achas. So it's all about Achdus, all about unifying is a very big part of the Dal Minim, in general Sukkot, but especially the Dal Minim. How about the Lulav now? The Lulav, who kapas tmorim, sha'olin hein kapis. Okay, so Lulav is called kapas tmorim. That when you look at a lulav, you see its leaves. When you look at the leaves, for example, of a tree, the leaves can be going in different directions. They don't have that type of uniformity that you have in a lulav. In a lulav, they're very tightly bound, and they're very much they're bent in, so to speak, all joining together like in one stalk. Leaves of other species don't have that element of joining together all in one direction. So that's with lulav, you see the unity in lulav. Okay. The hadas, the myrtle, the 3rd species, tlosa bechad kino. You have 3 leaves in one branch. So you see in a myrtle tree, a kosher myrtle that's used, you'll see one branch has more than 1 leaf. You have 3 in 1, so to speak. So that's another form of unity. Again, the leaves could be in different directions. You could have 1 leaf on a tree. Here you have them all 3 into one. B'chad kina. Kina is a stalk, is a b'chad branch. V'arava nikra achvena shegdelim ba'achva. The arava, the willow, is called achvena. Sometimes I think achvena. Yeah, achvena, correct. Which is a word in Aramaic, a translation for achva, like ava va'achva. Achva is attachment. Ava, like love and attachment, they grow together. So again, in different species, you may have different things growing separately. When it comes to the willow, they grow together. They grow in bunches, which you see in any willow tree. You could see that. Okay. Shekol zeh humeira al achdus. So all this indicates in each one of the species a certain measure of unity. Okay, we still have to figure out. So now, v'yadua, the achdus mitzad habitl, and it's known achdus comes mitzad bitl. When something is a very strong identity or a very sense of self, it usually is a competition to other selves. So when you don't have achdus, you don't have bitl, you don't have achdus. When everything is going its own direction, everyone's self-interest drives something. Or if it's not only self-interest, it could be like survival of the fittest when it comes to even vegetation. So each thing has its own agenda, which often conflicts with other agendas. Bitl, on the other hand, leads to achdus. So you could have different forces, each has their own opinion, for example, but it's the bitl that brings them together. Like he says in Tanya, Perek Lamed Beis, that Ava is dependent on bitl. When you have that nafshe iker and gufei tofel, that level of bitl, that we realize we're all brothers and we're all united under one Father, all the neshamas, like he says there, and they're all like they're all connected because they're all unified by the higher, by God, that brings to Achdus. So Achdus is a product of Bittul. So Achdus is Mitzad Bittul. So therefore, what do we know from this? That the Daled Minim, because they have Achdus, means they're bringing down Bittul. And what was the point? That you want the Bittul of Daas Elyon into Daas Tachton. So that's why these four species. He still didn't finish, but I'm just explaining the flow here. V'nimtze, and this Achdus, which comes due to Bittul, v'nimtze kol zeh b'tzmochim gashmin. And now you find a manifestation of this level of Achdus due to Bittul in physical tzmochim, in physical species that grow, physical objects, physical vegetation or plants. V'hainu, the Amshach is b'chinas ha-Bittul, the Daas Elyon, who gam b'biyah aydei b'chinas ha-Malchus. So what is he saying? In Inyan, you could then say, what do you need four species altogether? Why don't you just have a kavanah during davening or during sitting in a sukkah on the Hamshach of Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton? So he's saying the fact that it comes into physical species indicates that it's coming from Atzilus into Biyah. It's not just remaining in Ruchni, so to speak. That's what he's saying here. He says, this means that the Hamshach is b'chinas ha-Bittul, the Daas Elyon, who gam b'biyah aydei b'chinas ha-Malchus. Through Malchus, which carries, we said now, the Daas Elyon is nimshach into Malchus through the Daled Minim, through the Nanuyim, the Kavonim Nanuyim, the Daled Minim. That in turn, Malchus draws it into Biyah to the point that it even manifests in physical entities. V'zehu shenivchru elo haminim, and this is why these for these species were chosen lemitzvah, for the mitzvah. Shebehem va'ayodam, because within them and through them, ayodam, who amshach is b'chinas Daas Elyon b'chinas Malchus u'bebiyah. Because with them and through them, they are dafke the right kalim, the right species that reflect the Achdus that comes through Bittul to be drawn into Malchus and into Biyah, like you just explained. Okay. Now, I never did a study on other species. Could you find Achdus in other species? Maybe. But nevertheless, these four definitely distinguish themselves in this way. V'zehu inyan b'yem harishin. Now comes the next question. Remember the question of what? Not the question was what's the meaning with lekachtem lachem b'yem harishin? What's this rishon here? When is the 15th of the month? So he says v'zehu inyan b'yem harishin. This is also the inyan of yem harishin shebi gematria keser. B'yem harishin is gematria keser. Is it only rishon or b'yem harishin? Would someone want to do a quick calculation? Keser is 620. The Yom Harishon, let me see, 606. 611. Rishon alone. The whole thing is Gematria 620. Shin and Reish. Shin and Reish is 500. Yeah, it's B'yem Harishon. The whole B'yem Harishon is Gematria Keser. Okay, what does that mean? V'hainu. So that indicates the following: the Kamoy Hamshochem Ha'atzmis B'Atzilus. Just like the Hamshocha, the transmission from Atzmus of Atzilus, Shu B'chinas Daas Elyon. Which is the level of Daas Elyon. Remember, in Atzilus itself, there's the Atzmus of Atzilus. The higher level in Atzilus is Daas Elyon. Ukamoya the Chochmah, like the light energy of Chochmah that we learned. Chochmah is the level of Daas Elyon, relatively speaking. Chochmah Eloah, Chochmah Tator, Primis HaChochmah. Ukamoya Eirish Shemitzad HaDveikus Be'er Ein Sof, which is also similar to the Eirish in general, due to their attachment and connection to the infinite divine light. Hein b'chinas Daas Elyon canal. They're all on the level of Daas Elyon. Kamoi Kain, this is the end of the sentence. So just like the Hamshacha from Atzmus and Atzilus is a state of Daas Elyon in all the details, whether it's Atzmus of Atzilus or Chochmah or the general Eidos that are a state of Dveikus. Kamoi Kainu Inyan HaDaled Minim. The same thing is the Daled Minim. Shezeu Hamshachas Hadei Elyena, which is the Hamshacha, like he said before, of the Dei Elyena, Daas Elyon, the higher perspective, the Me'ein Sof Ba'atzilus, from Erein Sof into Atzilus, K'moi Kain, Hi Hamshacha B'Biyah. So too, next page, 1168, will be the transmission into Biyah that Daas Tachton should also be infused with this higher perspective. So one second, how does he answer the question? Yem Arishin is Kes. Oh, I understand. Okay. I have to spell it out. Lekachtem lechem b'yem Arishin is saying the following. That Yem Arishin is referring to Keser. You're drawing down Keser, which is higher than Atzilus, into Atzilus. That, and more specifically, is the drawing down of Daas Elyon, whatever level you're talking about. He's definitely bringing Keser into the picture. That's why it's b'yem Arishin. But that, in turn, is the Daas Elyon in Atzilus itself into Daas Tachton of Malchus and into Biyah. So b'yem Arishin is essentially alluding to the drawing down from a higher perspective, from Keser. He doesn't mamish spell it out, but you have to say that's the pshat, because that's what he says. That's clearly from Keser into Atzilus. Meaning like the Eira Chachme, okay, they're all Daas Elyon. So basically, he's equating the Daled Minim, which you take b'yem Arishin, to the Hamshacha for Yem Arishin into Atzilus. So the Daled Minim is focusing on the Das in Atzilus, Daas Elyon in Atzilus into Zah, into Malchus of Zah, all the way into Biyah. And the Yem Arishin is telling you that's the same idea as you're drawing from Yem Arishin, from Keser into Atzilus. That's what he's saying. And then comes the next step, where it comes down into Biyah, not just into Atzilus. So
Biyah is becoming like Atzilus?
Hold on. Three things that he's categorizing here. The Hamshach of Daas Elyon from higher than Atzilus, Keser, Yem Rishon, into Atzilus, Chochmah, and so on, Eidos. The next is in Atzilus itself, the Daled Minim from Daas Elyon, into Malchus, Nukve, the Zah, Malchus of Atzilus, and then from Atzilus into Biyah. So you have all the levels that he's been talking about. Daas Elyon is higher than Atzilus, which is Keser. Daas Elyon in Atzilus, and Daas Elyon as Atzilus compared to Biyah. In Atzilus itself, Daas Elyon, Daas Tachton, from Das into Malchus, and then from Atzilus to Biyah. So going back to the three ways of explaining Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton, the first way is that it's all that's higher than Atzilus is Daas Elyon, and Atzilus is Daas Tachton. The second way, which we're going to learn in the next mimer, the second is in Atzilus itself, you have Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton. And the third is that Atzilus is Daas Elyon and Biyah is Daas Tachton. So, therefore, what we're saying is b'yem Arishin, just like from Keser, you draw into Atzilus, the same thing in Atzilus itself, from Das, you draw into Malchus, and the same thing, you draw then into Biyah, which is like the four physical species. Let me just finish the lines, and then you can ask whatever you like. One second. And this is the meaning. You shall take to yourself the first day, meaning in Keser, Priyetz Hadar, Daled Minim Elu. These four species, the Kamoishem Begashmis, Yesh Behem Bechinas Ha'ardus. Just like physically they have unity by Dezei Yam Shoche, and I'm sorry, the Kamoishem Begashmis, Yesh Behem Bechinas Ha'ardus, because why these four? Because these four, even physically, have an element of unity. By Dezei Yam Shoche Bechinas Daas Elyon, but Malchus Be'elim is Biyah. And through these Daled Minim, you'll have the drawing down of the higher perspective of Daas Elyon, Yesh, of the Ayin Amiti, into Malchus and into the worlds of Biyah. So that's how he applies that whole subject to this mitzvah of lekachtem lechem. Okay. Any
But
questions?
that doesn't mean that he's changing. That he's changing.
One at a time. 1 second. One at a time.
Amazing.
You're asking something or you're stating
Bring
something?
everything down
No,
from
I'm
the
questioning.
highest
I'm
level. Amazing.
Everybody's speaking at the same time. I can't hear. Who's speaking first?
I said that this is a continuation to what I said a few minutes before. He said I should wait. That does not mean that it's changing the Daas Tachton. There's only Hamshachah from Daas Elyon, but the Daas Tachton remains a Daas Tachton because we need the yeshes like we explained before. Otherwise, it's Metzias.
Okay, fine with me. Okay.
I just think it's amazing that from a Asiya, you do a mitzvah, a certain mitzvah, and you're bringing down the highest levels from all the way up there down to Asiya. Just to me, it's amazing. I never heard this perspective before. It's fantastic.
Well, remember, I was saying in the previous classes that it all comes down to avodah. You have to find a place where all these levels are applied in our lives. Now, obviously, it's quite a few months until Sukkot, but the key thing is to find these levels in our own experiences. So now when you come to Sukkot, you take the Daled Minim, and if you'll remember what it says in this Maimer, you could always go back to it. You have an understanding that you're doing something. Like before the mitzvah of Daled Minim, before Sukkot, you don't do this. You may do it in different ways, but here Sukkot provides the opportunity to actually do exactly that, to bring into Daas Tachton a kavanah from a higher place of that level of bittul and achdus that comes from the Daled Minim, from the higher perspective into the lower perspective. Now, in practical terms, it goes back to what I said yesterday, again, in the previous days. You have to find within your own life an example of Daas Tachton. And then you could say, where's there an example of Daas Elyon feeding and being infused into my Daas Tachton? Until you don't do that, this remains abstract ideas and, as I said many times, mathematics or scientific. So that's really what the challenge is right now. Where do you find in your own life a Daas Tachton experience? And then how do you bring a Daas Elyon into that, whatever it may be? So it has to be practical. If not, it remains on paper. So there's no way around that. I wish I could give you a magic trick, but there's no way around that. That ultimately is where this becomes internalized. Like in the story we've talked about a number of times, the chassid and the non-chassid arguing or debating the existence of God, and finally the chassid who's exasperated says to the non-chassid, he says, I envy you because you think about God all day, and I have to admit, I think about myself all day. So the other fellow feels flattered by a compliment from a great chassid, until one day he discovers, either on his own or somebody enlightens him, that was actually an insult, because for the non-chassid, he knows that he exists. The yesh is for sure in place. The question is where the ayin is, where the God is. Where God fits, does he not fit, and how does he fit? That's the novelty. By the chassid, the opposite. He knows the yesh amiti is real, atmos is real, elokus is real. The question is, am I real? Do I exist? And why do I exist? And what's my purpose? And why am I here, etc.? This isn't two different, this isn't semantics. It's a different way of looking at existence. In other words, do you begin with you and you work your way up? Or you begin with what's above, meaning elokus, the divine, atzmus, elokus b'pshitas, and elam is b'schachus. And the elam is the innovation. Now, every one of us, I know intellectually this is just words, but in experience, the question is, can you find in your personal experience a taste of each one of these? If this was an advanced class and there were requirements, I would require from all of us, including myself, to write a paper on that or to deliver it bal peh and tell us an example of Daas Tachton and Daas Elyon in your life in a real way. That would be the real way of applying this type of Chassidus into our lives. Without that, you could understand it like we understand theoretical physics, theories, but you don't have that real mamoshes, the real tangible, full experience. And I can assure you, if you can do that, the way you do Daled Minim next Sukkot will be quite different. If it remains a theory, it's just going to be a thought. And I'm not saying to be critical. I'm saying we weren't trained to do this. I wasn't trained in yeshiva. No one demanded of us to apply this in that type of way, to find examples in our personal lives. And I'll tell you something even more. You can find examples even in children's lives, which would mean that we can teach this to our children too. Obviously, lefi erech, the children, lefi erech, their perspective. And there are ways to apply this. I can give examples, but I would love to hear if anybody wants to volunteer. Not that we need to hear all your confessions about what's going on. This isn't about Avedas. This is actually about perspectives. And it's an interesting exercise. Can you find within yourself, the yesh to ayin, meaning the Daas Tachton? I'm sure you could find examples every time you do something for Hashem. Whether you say a bracha or you say birchas hamazon or you daven, in a way you're taking your yesh and not following your personal taivas, and you're directing it l'shem shemayim in some way. But the Daas Elyon is the question, is the more challenging. Where do we find examples of that? So that's how I would conclude this mimer. Does anybody want to ask anything, comment or anything? If not,
what happened to Daas Tachton when the Daas Elyon in Shachenat?
What?
It's a different Daas Tachton, or it's becoming a Daas Elyon?
You'd have your answer if you did what I just said. I can't give you an answer to that.
Okay.
Because this is what you're asking is an experiential question. In Inyan, there's Daas Tachton, there's Daas Elyon. There's Daas Elyon that informs and is infused in Daas Tachton, like he's saying here. And then there's levels of higher and higher levels. You can get to a point where your Daas Tachton is elevated to a state of Daas Elyon, and then there's a higher Daas Elyon. Remember, there's a lot to say here. This is all, it's not just words. It's about finding examples of it in our lives. Like where in your Bittul Hayesh can you find a little Bittul B'Mitzias, for instance? That would be Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton. Pure Daas Elyon is a state where your entire being is experiencing only Elikus, and that you are non-existent altogether. There is that concept too. You can have that. People can have that as well. And then there's, like you just said, the Hamshach of Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton. Obviously, in the order of Aveda, B'Seder V'Hadrage. I'm not talking about unique times, Eis Ratzon or Tshuva, or where there's a Dilug, a leap. In the Seder V'Hadrage or Aveda al Pitam V'Das, in orderly, progressive fashion, you begin like this. You begin with the yesh. That we all know very well. I'm sure we can give plenty of examples of what the yesh is like. Okay, the yesh. Then you begin with sublimating the yesh, that it should be directed a bit, being aware of, and somewhat the yesh is sublimating itself or subjugating itself to an ayin. When you say Maida ani lefanecha, what are you saying? I, ani, amaida lefanecha shechzarta binishmasi. Your yesh, the ani of your yesh, is, like Chassidus says, is turning into a little ayin. Ani and ayin are the same letters. That you're maida. Now, if you don't say Maida ani lefanecha, you wake up and you just think, okay, I'm a self-made man or woman. I do whatever I want. Maida ani lefanecha is a very simple first step of taking a yesh, and instead of directing it toward your needs, you're acknowledging, thank you for returning my neshama to me. Very simple. So basically, you've taken a yesh and you've turned it to the ayin. Now, this alone, we know there can be infinite levels. How much are you turning it? You could say Maida ani, then go back to your yesh. Or you go into Birchas HaShachar and you acknowledge more of it. And you're introducing more of the ayin of Elikus into your life. So this is a process of yesh to ayin, basically ayin of yesh anivra, Daas Tachton. Now you can keep going levels and levels and levels. Then there comes a point where you come to the next level where you say, 1 second, this is all me being bottled to Elikus. How does Elikus look at it? The truth is, a real reality is not me going to Elikus, it's Elikus who created me. So where does it turn from suddenly you shift from the yesh to the ayin, where you start looking at the Elikus being more primary? And this again is level by level by level. I don't think there's there is no one stationary way to do this. Every one of us has to work with your yesh, and depending how you climb faster, slower, you may have setbacks. It all comes down to how much Aveda you're doing. As you climb the Aveda, you start moving and realizing that there's another perspective, which is the Daas Elyon, and there, Daas Elyon perspective, and there too there's levels. The ultimate level we learned is completely Atzmus and Oyer, the highest level of Oyer that's not even Oyer. All it is Atzmus expressing like we said, the day of amitis in atzmus, how atzmus sees oir, in the words of the Rebbe in B'yei Mashmini Atzeres. What we learned earlier. So you can outline all these levels, and all through all the levels I mentioned, 10 at least, if not more, much more, that you see. So the only way to really speak about this in any practical way, if it wasn't just, see, if you're just talking levels, then again, it's mathematics and it's science. Okay, level, this level, this level, this level. You know, where's oxygen? Where's hydrogen? Where is Mars, Venus, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, etc., etc. But when you're talking about it in a way that's supposed to be discussed, it becomes levels within you and your own consciousness. It's basically levels of your human consciousness embracing divine consciousness. And what level you're at can change one day to the next, 1 minute to the next, frankly. And that's how you use this as an operational tool of real Aveda, a real method of growing in your own consciousness. And I'll go a step further even. This isn't just about between Ben Adam Lamokim. It's also Ben Adam L'Chavere. When you have these levels of bittul that I'm discussing, it also is in context of your relationship with a spouse, relationship with children, relationship with other people, with community members. Because the more yeshes there is, the more machlekes is possible. The more bittul there is, the more the yesh is more refined, the more ayin, the more peace, the more achdus, as we learned. And this too can go level by level by level. You know, how much of the yesh is there? How much of the ayin? Is it the yesh looking at the ayin? Is it the yesh amiti looking at the ayin malmayil lamata? So you can create a whole model of growth, personal growth, growth in Avedus Hashem, Ben Adam Lamokim, Ben Adam L'Chavere. Every area of life can be fit into this rubric, into this type of model, this formula of how we grow in life. Essentially, the goal is to go from yesh to less yesh, to more ayin, to more refinement, to less mitzias, yesh and mitzias, nifrid, to becoming more dedicated to something greater than you are. And in a way that does not annihilate you. Remember, that's a good point that was made before. We're not talking about annihilating the yesh. We're not talking about destroying the yesh. We're talking about taming it, tempering it, channeling it to become a true keli for a lakus to the point of a dira b'tachtenim. We want the tachtenim, the yesh of the tachtenim, to be a dira le'yizbarach. Mashiach and Geula is when they join together. Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton come together, and they're to their levels. And Golus is halavai Daas Tachton. We have issues all together, but this is just a way of so-called a type of an overview of understanding the whole background and what the tools we're learning here to do. What is it? What is the goal of it all? Okay.
One thing about bringing it into our lives is I'm just to understand what Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton is there. I'm saying, like, before you start learning, you don't want to learn. You want to do other things or whatever. You want to stay in bed. So and then you force yourself to start learning. How it's going to be good. You say that would be, let's say, Daas Tachton, and then once you get into the mimer, or once you get into the things, it's like, how could I have not wanted it in the first place? That would be an example of Daas Elyon?
In a very, very grubber way, yeah, perhaps. If you can find two levels there, yeah. I mean, it's a far cry from true Daas Elyon, but relative to a person, it's better than nothing. It's, that would be an example where first state is basically you're struggling with the yesh and its interests, so at least you're directing it toward learning, as you said. And then it comes to a point where the learning becomes so given, you can't live without it. Yeah. That would be an example. But that, again, very relative. It's far from Atzilus and Biyah. It's in our personal Aveda. There's no question. If you can get to those two levels, to me, that would be a success story. But then the continues growing. But yes, that would be an application.
The Rabbi is not saying it, but maybe.
Did everybody hear that? What was just said? Here's one person in the class that actually gave an example of two ways, of two stages. I actually am very impressed that somebody at least said that, because that means you're giving it thought in a personal way.
Could I hear that again? The answer, what he just said? I'm sorry, I was distracted. That last point.
He just asked whether you can say Daas Tachton, Daas Elyon in a very personal way. The first is the battle with your yesh who wants to sleep more and is not interested in learning. Let's say Chassidus. And then you begin to learn. So that's like Daas Tachton. And then you come to a point where the learning becomes so geschmack and so obvious, you feel like you can't live without it. And that would be, relative to this person, would be more Daas Elyon because it becomes like a given. Elikus is the given. He doesn't have to struggle with the yesh and the bitl hayesh, but realizes that learning Chassidus or learning Torah is a given. So I said, yes, that's a taste. Again, so I'm not going to call that Daas Tachton, Daas Elyon in the full-blown way, but
because this is not Daas Tachton.
Anyone that would achieve that, to me, that would be, I would consider success.
Maybe the reason why you're saying al netir lulav, even though that the esrog is the choshev ezach, maybe because the lulav is the highest. You are mamshich midas.
I said that already. It's Sfarim talk about it. This is a shaila in halacha. Why it says al tilis lulav, not al tilis esrog.
Yeah, the Rabbi discussed. The Rabbi
because it's the highest. The most dover. So one is the reason because it's the highest min. Yeah.
No, according to the Rabbi Rashab is saying here that you are mamshich midas Elyon, this is the richest, physically highest.
No, I would say more impressed with the fact that it's the shidra, that it's considered the spinal cord, the lulav, which is a hamshacha from the moach through the spinal cord into the heart into the rest of the body. That's really what it is. That's a hamshacha rather than the highest. And it's interesting too. Isn't that interesting? I just learned that today from this. That I always wondered about lulav, but that's an interesting. It's the spine. According to Kabbalah, it's the spinal cord, and that would make sense as far as making this hamshacha. But I was wondering why. A couple of things, Rabbi Jacobson. One is that if you don't do it on Bayom Rishon, you're missing Keser in a sense, right? Because you see that even in halacha that if the dollar minimum is only deraisa on Yom Rishon. Not other days is the rabbanim. So you're losing out an aspect of the mitzvah, so to speak, which in here it would seem like that might be the highest levels, the keser within atzilus or something. You might be missing out because there is a distinction in halacha.
It's a good point. It definitely adds to the geschmack of this piece here. Yeah, I second that.
The second question was, and more profound, I think a little deeper maybe, and maybe not more profound. Why when we say that if you had kavanas, the first day of Sukkot comes, and I've learned this mimer, and I'm learning about all these hamshachas, but I don't do daled meaning bo mamish. You know, like when you say you think about tefillin, but if you don't put it on, you haven't accomplished anything. What I'm asking is that if the lack of the actual meiser in olam ha'asiyah, the daled minim, and now that I take in my sukkah, if I don't do that, is that affecting just the hamshacha from bria and yetzira that we've got? We could talk about it all the way in the spiritual worlds, but we're lacking the final tachlis in this world, or the mere fact that the actual fact that I'm not even doing it in this world will qualitatively affect the hamshachas that are in Atzilus in the spiritual worlds, if you can get what I mean there.
Yeah, I got exactly what you mean. The fact is, al pi halacha, and that's where Chassidus and halacha come together. If you have all the kavanas from beginning to end, and if you have the lulav and esrog sitting in front of you, but you don't take it and make the bracha and do these things, the mitzvah, it's as if you did nothing.
Wow.
It's because it's a mitzvah maisis. If you're talking about mitzvahs of Avas Hashem doesn't require a physical object.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you did nothing. It's just sitting on the table. It's like filling on the table with all the kavanas. So in Tanya, later in Tanya, in the later Prokim, he explains how the Maisa basically reverberates and sends a ripple effect through all of Ishtalshalos. So, like, the idea of if you did the Maisa and no kavanas at all, you're Mekayim the mitzvah. If you have all the kavanas, you don't do the mitzvah, you're not Mekayim anything.
So,
What
and
about
that's,
the Rabbi? How did the
but
Rabbi
what,
do it?
Listen, you have lekachtem lechem b'yem arishin. If Sukkot is on Shabbos, obviously, then like it says in Chassidus, Shabbos is mamshich, that which with the mitzvah, like Tkiyah Shefer on Shabbos. But that's because the Eibishter set it up that way. Rashbi and those individuals who were parted from certain mitzvahs was because they have like that power of Shabbos. That's mamshich, that which needs to be nimshich through the Maisa. But that's an exception. That's not the rule.
But my question would be that if I'm thinking about this mimer and all the hamshachas elyonim, I'm definitely changing my thoughts and my understandings. There is effect going on to me, and even though I wouldn't have I wouldn't have the light switch, meaning like the dollar meaning is like the wiring all the way to the light switch. But if you don't turn that light switch on, you don't get any hamshacha from the generating plant because there wasn't a completed circuit, so to speak. Whereas the other way I would look at it was that there was something accomplished. There is a light, but it's not a full light. No,
one second. There's one important qualification. If you do this now, we're learning the mimer now. It's not Sukkot. We're in the middle of Tevis now. You're learning the mimer now, and you're learning all these amshachas. You could be mamshech Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton right now. But Sukkot has a special mitzvah. Sukkot has the capacity to open up a special channel where your mamshech Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton into Gashmi Sa'ilam, not like you would do it right now, when you do it through learning this. Sukkot, those 7 days, has a mitzvah. That mitzvah is dafke mitzvah maisis that has all these powers. So I would say like this: you can always have experience of Daas Tachton, Daas Elyon throughout the year. Mm-hmm. But on Sukkot, we have an additional strength, and that strength can only be triggered by the action coupled with the kavanas. So that's why Shloshim Yom Kedem Achag, 30 days before the holiday, you learn all this. You learn the mitzvahs, the halachas, the chassidus, the kavana, and then comes the moment where you could actually bring it into full glow, full glory.
Full glory.
So it's not a contradiction. That's like saying if you learn about matzah in the middle of the winter, mm-hmm. and your mom should bittul through that, that's fine. But the power of Pesach is through a matzah michel de mamnusa, where you're actually taking matzah and putting it in your mouth with a bracha. You can't make a bracha. What you're saying is the spiritual is always there. But on these Yom Tevim, we have the power to actually be able to draw down a level that only this mitzvah can do, not another mitzvah.
Okay.
And that requires both kavanah, the neshama of the mitzvah is the kavanah, right, and the goof of the mitzvah, which is the body. So yes, neshamas in Gan Eden, they can learn Hilchos Sukkah and all these kavanas from today till tomorrow. They cannot be mamshech in tachtenim, this Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton. They can be mamshech in Ruchnius and Atzilus, but they're not going to transform this physical world. That's why neshama comes down.
They are not mamshech in Atzilus. It wird nimshach to them. Only b'olam hazeh. When you are learning now, you're mamshech Daas Elyon, because this is also a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah of Sukkah, but it's a mitzvah of Limud HaTorah. That's why you're...
A second. Before you finish, Eliezer, did you understand what I said?
Yes. But it seems like if I take the dollar meaning...
If you go with that approach, you can say, why don't we all stay in Gan Eden and learn all these kavanas and make a dinner b'tachtenim, theoretically.
Right. Or, I mean, even more probably, I could take the dollar meaning right now.
A mitzvah changes this physical world.
Right.
You cannot do that with a spiritual activity.
But speaking about all these, the mimer, speaking it is affecting Dibor, which is in the as a
what are you saying? So
mitzvah
is losing. Are you 1 second? So you're saying that Maisa Ha'ikar is not important. You don't need action.
No, I just said the opposite. Of course.
Let me ask you something. When we go, let me finish. When we go fundraising, and the guy says, "My thoughts are with you."
Oh, now you're hitting home. You're hitting home too much, Rabbi.
Okay. No,
I love what you do, but he doesn't pull it out of the pocket. You haven't accomplished anything. Good one.
So, the Rebbe told Arik Sharon, when the Rebbe started Miftzat Film, the Rebbe told Arik Sharon asked the Rebbe, why do you need the actual tefillin? Why can't you just think about it? So the Rebbe said to him, I'm surprised you would ask such a question as a general in an army. So, your soldiers, the military, train for years. They read manuals, they train exercises. He says, why do they have to go out to battle? When there's a war, why do they have to go out to battle? Why don't they just open up their manuals go into their training exercises? Why do they actually have to go and risk their lives and die sometimes? So he says to the Rebbe, you're not practical because we need to fight the battle. So the Rebbe said to him the same thing. We can learn all the halachas of tefillin and all the kavanas and alle gute Sachen, but you have to fight the battle. You need the schreiter. And the material is in this material world. You need to change the world. So the kavanas all help bring these hamshachas.
Right.
But you know what? When a Jew, a simple Jew who doesn't know what Daas Elyon is and not Daas Tachton, when he's mekayim the mitzvah in action, maybe the Eibishter is being mamshech all these hamshachas, even if he's not aware. Whereas somebody who's aware but is not doing the mitzvah, it remains in Tanya, he says it remains in Bria, in Yetzirah, and so on. It doesn't come into this material world. Anyway, we're talking about a different subject altogether, the importance of mitzvahs maisis. It's not what the discussion here is.
No, I was talking about hamshachas.
Let me just say this. Look, let me stop the class here. I didn't stop the recording. We finished the Maimon 139, top of page 1168.